start the recording. So welcome to the Technical Subcommittee on Encoded Archival Standards and our updates after our annual meeting series of a number of days. I've just put the date on this slide saying Thursday, 14th of August. I have put no timings because let's put it this way. If I get the agenda on next slide. We have been meeting for 4 days. We are getting a bit time zone confused and day confused. But our agenda for today is that we will first give you a short recap of what TS-EAS is. Then we will be talking about our annual meeting for 2025, all the 4 days that we have been meeting online. We will end off with a Q&A where we will be letting you all to raise your hand and ask your questions or write them in the chat. We have all our team leads, and what that is, you will be crystal clear in a couple of minutes. And it's really going to be ask what you want regarding the EAS standards. After that, we are actually closing out our 4 days of annual meetings and this session. So I will be starting off with a short recap, which is an introduction to TS-EAS. So we have bylaws as all the groups that are housed by SIA. We have the link. The presentation will be available afterwards, so you can really read them if you want to. What you can see in the bylaws is that we are a group consisting of up to 25 members, and we are kind of unique in this way, in the way of we are both having both members from SIA, but also international members. The standards we are working with are used internationally. We have 2 co-chairs besides the 25 members, one coming from SIA and one being the international one. I'm the international one. I'm named Karin Bredenberg, and I'm working at a municipality archive organization in Sweden. With me, I have Mary Samouelian, who is SIA based, working at Harvard Libraries in Boston. So really, it's US. And we also have a number of different people also participating in our group. We have an early career member. We also have a number of liaisons and ex-officios being members of our team. So we are quite a big group. And I already here want to say that if you want to become a member of TS-EAS, either if you are an SIA member or if you are an international person who wants to join us as a member, keep an eye out for the call that's being sent out later this fall by SIA. We have the same application process. So whether you are an SIA member or wanting to be a member coming from SIA or coming from internationally, you apply in the same way. So information will be sent out when the call and the software to apply through is available. Yeah. This is how we are looking now, or this is all the members of our team. We are having some people not being on the photo, but we do have a photo opportunity in our October meeting where we really try to catch everybody. Just to show you that we are a big group. And on the next slide, I said we were working internationally. These are all the time zones and different places where we are living and working. So you see, we are spread. So we do handle time zones, and that's why we kind of, after 4 days, are starting to lose the time zones and just talking about 30 minutes after the hour to make it easier. If you are joining and are thinking about joining, This is the spread of people you will be working with. We are really spread around the world. If you take the next one. So what do we do? Well, we are considering and implement requests from the community following the rolling revision cycle for minor revisions for the EAS standards. And what they are, you will see quite soon. I have a feeling that most of you already know, but repetition is good. The minor revisions happens annually. We are also leading the major revisions of the EAS standards following SIA's and the Standards Committee's recommendation for general review every 5th year. So the next slide. As you saw, we are a huge group. We have some time zones to consider having meetings. What we do is that we meet, the full committee meets 4 times a year, one being in close perimeter to the SIA annual meeting. Then we have split the work up in multiple sub-teams. And you have a link here to the current sub-teams that we are having, and I will introduce them here to you. So first of all, we have the EIC CPF sub-team. They are responsible for handling the schema and tag library for encoded archival context, corporate bodies, person and families, PU, the creators of records. They are responsible for the schema and documentation. And the important part here is to see that you really see is that we have different number of members in all the sub-teams. But all teams are having US-based, also known as SIA members, and international members. So we are working together because the standards that we have are being used all over the world. The teams meet monthly, and we have it spread out on which day and which time, or the time is actually made sure that all the members of the team can participate. So you see that it's quite late in Beijing and Melbourne when the team meets, and kind of early in New York. But that's what's happening when you have to handle time zones. We have documentation in form of both GitHub, and then the standard itself is published as the Stadtbibliothek Berlin. Then we have a smaller team for EACF, Encoded Archival Context Functions. That's the standard that's coming to life now. It's a new standard within our EAS standard family, and it's concerning describing the functions and activities, which in turn forms the processes that you mostly see in a corporate body or in an organization, but also people can have functions and activities. So it's a way of describing the process in which a record was the outcome. So giving the total feeling and documenting how the records came to be, which is becoming more and more important to be able to do. I haven't put any meetings times here because since this is a new standard and all things that has been going on, this team actually during the last quarter of the year has met almost once a week. So it's been a lot of work going on to make sure that we have a new standard on its way. And then we have a third standard in the mixture in our EAS standard suite, being EAD, Encoded Archival Description. And if you don't know that one is handling the finding aids, I'm not sure that you have been tagging along since the 1990s. The big thing that all teams do, as you see, is caring about the schema and about the documentation. So the tag libraries and accompanying documentation, you will be hearing more about that today. The EAD sub-team is also mixed with international members, but not that many SAA-based members currently. And the notes can be found in GitHub. And quite frankly, I see that I missed to put in the link to EAD, but we do have a slide with all the links that you need. EAD is published at the Library of Congress webpage. So a lot of things. Then we have some supporting sub-teams, where the first one is the schema sub-team. So we have a schema sub-team also here, US and international, and they are the ones who are creating the schemas after the different teams have said how the schemas should look and what they should contain in forms of elements and attributes. They also take care of the schema-related bug reports that we get and creating new schemas as required, and schematron documents for validation following the rules we are setting up. The schema sub-team also has the responsibility for the documentation in form of the tag libraries and the best practice guide. Everything will be totally clear during this session. What we have done during this period of doing a revision is that we have created a task force for the best tag libraries and best practice guide to really make sure that we have people that are responsible for the creation of the running the transformations of creating the tag libraries in all the forms we are publishing them, maintaining this transformation and making sure that we are using the same encoding everywhere, and also the updating and making sure that everything works together. So yeah, that's the schema team. And then we have another really important part, and that's the outreach sub-team. We need to make sure that we are doing outreach and that we promote the broader awareness of what we do and our standards to different stakeholders and audiences. The team also works together with the EAS section and the collection management section. So we really covers a lot of different bases. And one thing you need to think about is that when it comes to outreach, that is also considering US, but also international. So when we do things, that will usually be happening more than once. This is a one-time occasion though, since currently we are working on US timing using the Eastern summer time. Otherwise, when we do have a webinar, that's usually happening twice or even 3 times to make sure that everybody can participate during their office hours. It's a small team with not that many members, but as I said, also liaisons from some this affiliated SAA sections. We have a handbook. What do we do? How often do we meet? And we have a web page, a microsite at SAA, giving news and information. And next one. Here you have a list of links. And as I said, you will have access to the presentation afterwards. We have the handbook, you have the SAA web page, EIC, CPF, EID, the email list, the email list subscription settings, and yeah, I'm not counting on you wanting to screenshot this. You will get a clickable links afterwards. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Mary to talk about what we've been up to since Monday.
Thanks, Karin. And I apologize that my little tag says SAA headquarters. I am not SAA headquarters, but yes, thank you. So as Karin mentioned, our annual TS-EAS meeting is close to the SAA annual meeting, and TS-EAS meets for a longer meeting. Typically we meet in person, but this year we shifted and we met online for 4 days, typically from 9 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. And during this time, you'll learn more about what we talked about during those 4 days. We will have a summary of our meetings this week following after we've talked some about the current ongoing revisions. So keep an eye out for that. So the revision recommendations and schedule up to now, as Karin mentioned, each standard has its own revision cycle. It considers and implements requests from the community following the rolling revision for minor revisions of the EAS standards. And then that also leads the major revision of the EAS following SAA's and the standard committee's recommendation for general review every 5 years. For those who have been around for a while, you probably have realized that the revision cycles for EAD and EACCPF were staggered. So you would go through one revision cycle, then concurrently the other standard was following a revision, and they were just kind of hopping over each other. And unfortunately, what that has led to is a misalignment and discrepancies between the two standards, particularly with the shared elements. And we'll talk a little bit more about the shared elements in the next few slides. And then, of course, with the introduction of a third standard, EACF, that would create yet another revision cycle. So moving forward, we'll still follow the basic revision cycle guidelines. We'll consider and implement requests from the community following the rolling revision cycle for minor revisions, and then, of course, the major revisions following the recommendations for general view every 5 years. However, the EAS, which is EACCPF, EACF, and EAD, will be treated as a suite of standards. And if you're going to hear this multiple times throughout this presentation, is to shift the thinking that these are 3 separate standards and start to think of them as a suite of standards. And what this means is that the major revisions will be happening for all at the same time. Minor revisions will happen yearly for them as needed and as requested by the community. So the primary focus of our annual meeting was to be ready to hand over the revision of EAD4, the new EACF, and an update to EACCPF. And again, it's the suite of tools. So we needed to get prepared because we have to submit a submission package to both standards and the SAA Council for approval of this suite of standards, which you'll learn more about later on. And one of the components that really drives this work is to make sure that we are following the TS-EAS design principles, and we've provided a link for you. But in essence, there's kind of 2 different principles, and I won't read all of these, but there are schema principles that we do follow. The biggest thing is that simplicity comes first. That is for both the schema and the documentation and next slide. That is like the #1 thing, is that we want to make sure that it's simple. We know that there's a lot of elements, there's a lot going on with these standards, and really to make it as simple as possible so that people will actually use the standards. So that is one of the driving principles for both. And then you can see that there's a bunch of other things listed, but just the point being is that really drives both the major revisions and the minor revisions for all of these standards. For the documentation, which you'll learn a little bit about later on with the best practices guide and the tag libraries, is that these will be published online and made available. They'll include encoding samples and be accessible to everyone. And it's published in English as its primary language. But really the point being is that we want to make sure that it's shared with the entire community in as many places as possible so that people can easily access it, easily understand it. So with the goal of adopting these standards for use in their daily work. So day 1, which seems like a long time ago, even though it was Monday, we started off besides introductions and welcoming everybody to the annual meeting, there were some outstanding issues that came out of the second call for comments and with some of the work that we've been doing with the shared elements. So we kicked off the meeting by addressing and making final decisions on some of the outstanding issues that were still remaining. So for EACF, there were no outstanding issues. For EACCPF, there were 2 remaining issues. We've provided links to the GitHub issues if you want to read more about them in detail. But essentially, the first one had to do with renaming provenance event and its content model. And the resolution was to rename provenance event to narrative event, and then to ensure that all sub-elements are repeatable. The second issue was attributes for multiple identities. And the resolution was to treat multiple identities in the same way that we're treating all elements in all 3 EAS. And then the extra part of that is that we all agreed that detailed examples are needed in the best practices guide to clearly explain the multiple identities element. And just as a keeping out, you'll hear best practices guide through all of these presentations because it's going to become such an important part of sharing and communicating all of this information to a wider community. For EAD, there was one remaining issue, and it had to do with the element function in EAD. Since, as Karin mentioned, we are going to have EAC functions, the question was, how does the EAD element function fit into the bigger picture? So in EACCPF, functions, it was proposed that that becomes function perform and function, we had, function, sorry, the plural and the singular, to differentiate between EACF, but still be able to give a brief description of the function that was performed by the described entity. In essence, if you wanted to create a more simple version of EACF, then you could use the functions performed in EACCPF. The background information was provided for function in EAD, including comparison to EACCPF2 and EAF1. And it was noted that the distinction that the function element in EAD is to document the relationship between a function and the described material it generated. So the resolution was to retain function as it currently is for EAD4, with the possibility to a brief description or reference to an EAF document. And as with the 2 issues that we previously talked about, detailed examples are needed in the best practices guide to clearly explain the function element. So throughout the entire conversations that we had with these issues, the overall conclusion was that we will be asking for examples of descriptions of functions and activities that are recorded from institutions using, for example, Atom, but also other systems from the larger community. And then the new EAS standard, EACF, will be promoted with different types of outreach like webinars and email to inform about why and when to use it, because it is a new standard. So there does need to be some additional emphasis on, so people understand what the purpose is and how it relates to the other EAS standards. And then we moved on to our best practices guide. And this is an addition from the last revision of EACCPF. And now we are happy to hand over the presentation to Iris Lee, who is leading the effort on the best practices guide. So Iris, I will mute myself, but tell me when to turn the slide.
Thanks. And thank you, Karin and Mary, for asking me to just give a brief presentation on this. I appreciate it. So hi, everybody. I'm Iris Lee, and I am the person behind the best practices guide as it stands now. Hopefully we will grow because I'm only one person. I'm part of the documentation task force along with the tag library team. So next. First, I'm going to give a very brief overview. And this, at first, I thought we needed to, I wanted to have a fun illustration about, why we would need a best practices guide. But as we've talked over the last 4 days, it's like it keeps coming up, and we really do need this because there are such nuances in archival description, and these elements and attributes have been so carefully constructed. Um, we really do need a separate document to explain in context what and how to use these attributes and elements. So here we have Elephant and Piggy from the Mo Willems series, Elephant and Piggy, and Elephant does not understand these attributes for ID and at target. And he's read the tag library over and over, which I don't know if you can relate to this, but he doesn't get it. And Piggy has an idea. Let's ask friends. They'll help. More minds, more ideas. Let's get together. Let's build something for our community. And the best practices guide was born. So I've told you a little bit about what it is. How it started was that it came about during the EAC CPF 2 revision, and we thought it would be helpful as a group within the team to share some use cases for EAC CPF. We wanted to kind of grow adoption and just to like illustrate the differences in EAC CPF 2.0. So it really did come out of the shared document, which is linked here. It's like kind of laid out like a paper to go over very common topics that people have questions on. So concepts, and then provide example encodings for these concepts. So really the goals were to, again, provide context around topics, share real use cases with example encodings. So more to like supplement the tag library at the time. We were hoping to promote wider adoption and like build a comfort in knowing these standards and employing, well, this particular standard. We wanted to describe the usage in a natural language. So maybe get away from the technical jargon and just describe it as we would come across our description work and describe it naturally. And then in doing this, in creating this resource, we wanted to build a foundation that could include all of the EAS standards, including EAD and EACF. So, and underlying all of this, we wanted to build this as a living resource that was being updated on an ongoing basis by our professional community and for our professional community. So I'm going to describe a little bit the difference between the tag library and the best practices guide in case you're kind of wondering, well, like we have one standard documentation. Why do we need another one? So the tag library is a more formal documentation that's written and approved and published by the schema committee, whereas the best practices guide is produced by committee, but it is produced with open contributions and ongoing additions as necessary. The tag library defines the elements and attributes and each metadata schema, and it's usually listed out in alphabetical order, whereas in the best practices guide, we describe the elements and attributes in context rather than element by element explanation, so you can really see how the elements of a schema work together to create a description. The tag library will lay out which values and what constraints certain elements may have. And in the best practices guide, we try to document examples of valid encodings for like very specific use cases, rather than go element by element. And then for both of these types of documentation, it's a reference for creating valid metadata based on these schema releases. So if you reference either of them, we hope we're giving you the resource to build valid metadata using these documentation. So here is just a side-by-side comparison of the attribute ID in the tag library for, I think this is EAC CPF. And on the right, we have an example of how the page would be constructed in the best practices guide. And this is coming from that initial draft document. So you see in the best practices guide, you have a little more context, a little more description about how the attribute ID would work with the attribute target. Whereas in the best practices guide, you just get the description and definition for the attribute ID. And this is what it looks like online. We use GitHub Pages to publish this documentation. This is how, so it's following a very similar format, but it's just available online. And we see that there are snippets of code below the description, which can be easily copied and pasted. Next slide. Thank you. And so the other difference between the tag libraries and the best practices guide is we really wanted to have a centralized source for all this documentation. So in the tag libraries, you might have separate PDFs, one for each standard as they come out in their releases. But in the best practice guide, they can really exist together in one online resource. And if we look at the next slide, we can see that even though the tag libraries are separate documents, they can be linked within the best practices guide. So one place to find hopefully all the information you need. And next slide. So, oh, I have to thank Kirsten from the EAD team. She's the EAD team lead for this. I stole your example here for this slide because I wanted to incorporate some of the great suggestions that were made during our meeting this week. And one of the suggestions was, if we're going to have encodings as examples, we really need to have the most basic encoding for an example that would be valid for a record, and then like the most complex, so we can see how an element can apply, you know, all the different sub-elements and all the different attributes. So we're hoping to provide this in upcoming revisions of the best practices guide. And yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about using GitHub Pages. So we decided that probably the best and the easiest lift for us would be to, oh, thank you, Kirsten, would be to use GitHub Pages. A lot our repositories are on GitHub. It just made sense to carry on that documentation in GitHub. So these pages are built in GitHub using a static site generator called Jekyll. And that has built-in support for GitHub Pages, meaning that you can write your content in Markdown. So if you're familiar with adding GitHub content, Markdown is what they use to publish pages. So it's really an easy way to get content up quickly without fuss. I'm not a web designer, so I was really happy to just kind of like a plug and play scenario. And within GitHub, there are many, many free themes using Jekyll. So I chose one that was like very clean and simple and easy to customize. And that's just the docs theme. So here's some Markdown. I just wanted to show you like what a page would look like. So if you think about that page in the regular doc format into the online layout, this is kind of the in-between stage. And the top lines 1 through 6 are where we define navigation within the site. And then from line 8 down is markdown for the content that you see on a web page. So again, it's very simple, a hash mark for headings, 2 asterisks to mark a section as bold, and then for encoding code, you use the backticks, which is great because not only can you define code within a line, so you can define parts of a sentence as code, but then you can also define blocks of code. As you can see at the very, very bottom at example, and I'm sorry I didn't include more for that, but underneath that is just a snippet of code that you can drop into your content. If you want to know more about Markdown, I put a link there for you to explore on your own. Thanks. And then, like with the design principles for the schema, formatting the content, really, we just wanted to keep it simple. And, for me, just keeping it consistent. Simple, consistent. Here I put think template. I love templates. I think everyone loves a template. No, I shouldn't say that. I'll speak for myself. I love a template. And for communicating concepts that that are involved in creating these related descriptions that could be layered and very nuanced. It's, you just want to be able to navigate that content in an easy way. So keep it simple, keep it consistent. We want that's also to accommodate all of the EAS standards. So we don't want to be doing something special for one standard. We don't want to be doing something special for functions and then make it different for EAD, because then it just makes things more complicated and doesn't need to be. We want to provide content for more than one standard on a page. So as we go further into EAS as standards, there are shared standards across all 3 schemas. Some being shared with only 2 standards of the 3, but in any case, there are shared elements and shared attributes within the EAS suite. So we wanted to be able to create content, like format pages, so that it would accommodate all of the standards within the EAS suite. And hoping that this will continue to become a growing resource, we wanted to be able to create easy pages to make content easily updated, easily shareable, and easily understood. So multiple users can publish within the site, and also, just to be understood across the standards. And I will say that the site as it is now, it's not there yet, but I'm going to be doing some major restructuring in the next few months as we wait for schema approvals. So, and you're going to see a little bit of that in the next few slides here. But just to show you just the overall hierarchy of the site, we have the main navigation on the left, and underneath that there are levels of content. So I'll show you how we're restructuring this in some later slides, but for now, our first level of content will be listed on the left, and we'll text about what the topic is about. It can contain many subpages, and it'll have a table of contents. And those are linked to their individual pages. So yeah. And the second level, so this is a subpage to the topic, will also appear in the left-hand navigation. This is a part of the Jekyll theme. And it may contain subpages, it may not. But the main body most often will contain the heading, the schema that we're dealing with, the context in which this topic is discussed, a description of the use case that's going to be used to provide the example below. I'm sorry, again, with these screenshots, you can't really see the code snippet, but the code snippet is there, and in the site, you're able to copy and paste that code snippet if you'd like. There's another type of page, which will fall more under the category of term lists. So there are term lists shared across the EAS suite. Here we see address line type. There'll be a scope note for the attribute that we're talking about. There will be links to the references for which we have got the content for the scope note. And sometimes there'll be an example, other times there might not be. But following that will be a list of the terms that are formatted as subheadings. So the first one you see here is county. So this is basically for address line type, you can have the vocabulary term county, which will also have a scope note, perhaps a reference link, but maybe not as often. And then there will be a third level of content, the way that the content is being restructured, but I haven't decided what that's going to look like yet. But it's probably going to be the same kind of formatting decisions, keeping things simple and consistent. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about the restructuring here. Just really quickly, we decided that we needed to rethink how the best practices guide looks if we're going to include EAD4 and EACF. And basically, I wanted to make sure that when a user comes to the site, that they're able to navigate quickly into either the standard that they are looking for more resources for, or topics that they're most interested in. So this new change really includes not just a reorganization, but like an orientation for new users. So we're going to be adding an about page, which will help users navigate the site, and then organizing the sections into broader topics. So this is what the site looks like now. If you go to the home page, and there's information about the Encoded Archival Standards. Right now it's very CPF heavy, but that will be changing. And then in the next slide, we're going to see, I'm sorry. So the navigation here, because it was driven by the document, it's driven by topics, and it made sense at the time, but now that we're growing to include these other standards, we really have to change the way that we structure this. So in the next slide, and actually, can you go to the next slide too? Because thank you. We really want to break it up into sections. So the home page will stay roughly the same, but the home and the about page are going to be mostly about overview and how to use the site. We'll have 4 new pages about EAD, about EAC-CPF, about EACF, and the shared elements. which is just a focus on the schemas themselves. So if you need reference for EAC functions, you can go right there. You can get the tag library and some additional support for functions. The sections in green are really, I mean, they're almost, I've been thinking about this as these days have passed, and these are kind of the shared elements. So these are topics and concepts that you will find within each schema. So I've broken them out into sections that appear within the descriptive record, and within those you'll find more discrete topics. The blue references there is just an important concept across schemas. It doesn't necessarily have to do with description, but it can relate to a lot of different things like vocabularies or just links within a record. So I thought that that was just a separate but important concept that we needed to highlight. And then crosswalks. It's helpful related information. I think it will be really useful in the future. While it doesn't help you create EAS records, it will help with maybe aligning the metadata with something like with the international standards. I think right now we have the EAC CPF to ISAR. Hopefully in the future we'll have EAS standards, crosswalk to RIC. We talked about having old versions of the EAS standards being crosswalked to newer versions. So like say EAD3 to EAD4. So really hopefully helpful information going up in crosswalks in the near future. And then another suggestion that I took to heart during our discussions was to make sure that there were links from pages in the schema to the different topics that are discussed within the best practices guide and vice versa. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how that cross-referencing will happen within the website. So perhaps under control, under the schema, if it says EAD, it might link to the About EAD page, or if we're talking about a particular element within EAD, maybe it links to that page in the tag library. I'm not sure how this is going to work just yet, but I'm hoping that there will be a really great cross-referencing happening. And then vice versa with the EAD, if you're in the About EAD section and you want to learn more about how to create relations to entities, then it'll take you out, pop you over to relations, but you'll have a seamless experience. Either way you get into the site. And yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about collaboration because I'm one person. I didn't write the content on the site, but I did put it together. So this team, the entire TS-EAS team is quite big. And we're comprised of these 4 teams. And it really is a collaborative effort. And having the task force coming together is really nice. That was a very recent thing that happened, and it's helped us kind of just get together and have a dedicated space to talk about how to build these things with intention. So I do rely on the help of friends. So the way that this can work is that sub-teams can make existing drafts for the best practices guide as they need or as they hear from their community. They can keep their content until it's finalized by like the team lead, They can send me a link to either a topic paper or spreadsheet or data table, or they can move their drafts into a shared best practices guide folder, which I've created in our Google Drive. But really, I don't need to see things until they're ready to be published. And just to keep things transparent, I'm asking that the team lead or someone from their team submit a GitHub issue, and then I'm thinking about having a final draft folder in the GitHub repository to move those drafts into. So really, we're kind of working in a shared space in Google Drive, and then finalized versions come to the GitHub repository. And, like I said earlier, this effort is really, it's a resource that's built for the community by our community. So we welcome feedback and requests. You can either send GitHub issues, which I'm going to be mocking up, or I'm going to be creating different issue templates for different scenarios. Like say you want to propose a topic for the best practices guide, you can send or post an issue on that using a specialized template for that. Or you can email TS-EAS at archivist.org, and somebody will funnel that down to me. And then I'm really hoping that during this year and the next year that we get some visibility and have more engagement. I'm looking to outreach and communications to help us get the word out. We can also publish links to the SAA site. We talked about publishing a link to the main BPG page and the tag library, and perhaps, if this is written about in other publications, we can get more visibility there. But mainly, I wanted to point out that this is a living document for people who create archival descriptions, people who use archival descriptions. And we're inviting the people from our community to propose content or highlight issues that we can tackle in the future. So the process will be that contributions from the community will be vetted by our EAS teams, and most likely they will end up in our site and be helpful to somebody. Oh, so in thinking about this major restructuring project that I'm going to be undertaking in the next few months, I started to think about how we can best handle releases of the best practices guide, because even though schemas get revised and get updated, it takes a little while for the community to adopt new standards or revised standards. So it might be really important for somebody to have access to those standards that are encoded in EAC CPF 2.0. So I haven't completely figured out how to create this versioning, but we will in the future make previous publications of the best practices guide available. So this next push, which I'm hoping will be ready by February 2026, will be like the version 1 of the best practices guide. And this current version as a beta will be archived but available in the best practices guide version 1. Version 1 will cover EAC CPF 3.0, EACF, the new brand new functions standard, and then EAD 4.0. I would say by March, we would want to start to gather some user feedback. And in the intervening years between the major standard revisions, the documentation task force meet quarterly, so we'll continue to meet quarterly, and we'll review changes, additions, and for the best practices guide, if we need to meet more to get content up, then we can meet more. But for now, we're meeting quarterly. And thank you. Thank you for listening to me. And thank you also to our fair use guest appearance by Elephant and Piggy. If you don't know Elephant and Piggy, there's a link there. I love Mo Willems. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Iris. That was great. So let's move on to day 2. And day 2 was more about shared elements and attributes. So you've heard the term shared elements and attributes. So moving forward, we will have introduced the concept of shared elements and attributes. And these, as you'll learn, these are described in the upcoming new tag libraries and conforms to the Principle 1 in the TS-EAS design principles that each element will be defined once. And the discussion centered around really that we lacked a formal decision. We have been talking about this so naturally over the last year, particularly with the alignment of the 3 standards, that it seemed like this was just a given for everybody. But the fact is that we had not formally agreed that that's what we should do in the aligned EAS standards. So the resolution is that everybody gave a thumbs up, so it became more formal. The members also suggested that the tag library and best practices guides should highlight where elements and attributes are shared and why they are shared. So we also talked about encoding examples in both the best practices guide and the tag libraries, which Iris spoke about. And really the question is, how do we show how elements and attributes look? We want to give guidance on usage, and it became such a the topic became a little overwhelming for the entire TS membership, because there's a lot of nuances to this topic, that the resolution was to create a working group, a small working group, and they'll be looking into how this should be accomplished with an eye towards meeting community needs. So that group will be kicking off soon. The tag libraries, we talked a little bit about that. They're evolving and they are the authoritative document. So now I'll switch it over to Alex Dury, and he'll give an introduction to the tag libraries.
Hello. So Iris just gave a really wonderful overview of the best practices guide, and I'm going to cover the tag libraries, which are the technical, sort of the technical standardized definitions of the elements, and how TS-EAS's new approach to managing to sharing elements across standards impacts the tag libraries. So to start off, so the tag libraries are hosted on currently for EAD by the Library of Congress and for EACCPF by Staatsbibliothek, but they're managed as working documents on GitHub in the EAS tag libraries repository. And the tag libraries, they start off by being encoded into TI-XML, an encoding standard used for document publishing and management. And the way that we manage these is that each attribute element gets its own XML file. So if you go in, you'll see there are, basically at the top level, if you open up, say, the EAD4 tag library file, it's kind of short. It's just the narrative description, some cover page information, and then a whole bunch of links out to other files. Each of those files is one element or attribute that's used in the standard. And the way that, and these get turned, these TI XML documents, what happens is when we go to build them, the build process pulls together all of the files referenced by the top level standards document and pulls them all together into one big file, and then generates a PDF and an HTML file. And these two documents are how we publish the tag libraries. The HTML is what gets sent to LC and sets bibliotech, and the PDF is what's hosted there and shared out as sort of like the printable version. So in the tag libraries, the actual contents are managed by their respective subteams. The AD team manages the content of EAD, the EAC team manages EAC, and the EAF team manages EAF. However, there's a tag library and best practice guide task force, and this group manages the rest of the process. So for example, in GitHub, the standard team submit changes via pull requests against the repositories, and the task force reviews them and approves any changes. If there are conflicts between versions, which can happen during revision cycles, as multiple teams are working on multiple or can be working the same documents at the same time, the task force resolves any conflicts that come up. If there are any technical bugs that arise, for example, due to XML coding errors, issues in the build process, the task force resolves those. And for enhancing the PDFs or HTMLs themselves, the task force will review the transformation process and look for ways to sort of make the documents as usable as possible. So with the new revision cycle, where there are currently 3 standards under revision, the task force has been very, very busy. There's been a lot of great work that's been happening, and the task force has sort of been sort of doing air traffic control on the various changes coming in, and especially with the new shared elements and attributes, making sure that everything is synchronized across all 3 standards. So the task force was created this winter to formally manage documentation. It consists of myself, Iris Lee, and Ellie Smith. Historically, because the standards are managed, the tag libraries are managed as separate by their own subteams. There's never really a need for like a separate cross standards group to sort of oversee them. But as we've moved towards shared processes and shared documents and shared elements for each standard, we quickly realized that we needed some sort of formalized oversight or a group that can sort of have like formal management of the tag libraries. So I mentioned that it used to be that each standard had its own tag library. So the way it used to be is that each each tag library was its own big document. Going back to the days of using Microsoft Word, and then later on TI XML. And these are essentially single enormous documents that contained everything in the tag library. So if you went to the EAD tag library document, it was one enormous XML file that had all the elements in it. If you went to EAC CPF, it was the same deal. It was a single enormous file, all the same, that had all of its elements inside of it, and the two documents never sort of interacted. If you wanted any sort of like alignment or shared language between the two, you would have to go in and like manually update them to align them. And this was okay back when they were treated as 2 entirely distinct standards. But as EAS has moved towards shared elements and attributes, we realized that trying to align them across 2 different documents simultaneously was going to be extremely difficult. Any updates would have to be made twice. You constantly have to check to make sure that you made a change in one place. You have to make sure you update it everywhere in the other one too. So it's very easy for them to fall out of sync. And it meant that any sort of like decisions made by whoever's working on the standards or the tag libraries wouldn't be updated, wouldn't be reflected in both documents. So it really became an issue. It really became a huge management issue, and we realized that it just wasn't tenable. So in 2023, 2024, we implemented shared pages between the documents. So what we did was we essentially made them into modular documents, as I mentioned, where the top level for the standard is essentially just a listing of all the elements and attributes inside of it. And since each page is its own, or each element attribute gets its own page, they can be managed external to the standard. And what's great about this is that, let's say for, control, for example, which is used across all the standards, well, we don't have to rewrite control every time we want to use it. We can just manage it as a single file, and then have both EAD and EAC-CPF reference the exact same file. And the advantage of this, and there are a lot of advantages to this. And then if there are any elements that aren't shared, they can just be referenced by their own standards, and we sort of don't need to worry about, and they can essentially be managed as it used to be, where EAC-CPF doesn't have to think too hard about unit title and vice versa, but abstract can be used anywhere it needs to be. And what we learned this past summer with the development of the EAF tag libraries is that since we're breaking out the elements and attributes into their own files, if we ever need to bring on a new standard, it's actually very, very easy to start using shared elements with it. For EAF, all we need to do is start using control to add control to the tag library was to add the reference, and now EAF picks up everything that was already written for EAD and EAC-CPF. You can see in this graph that identity is shared between EAF and EAC, but not EAD. Abstract between EAC and EAD, and unit title continues to just be an EAD element. So what this new sort of model for managing the tag libraries lets us do is we essentially use and reuse elements and attributes where needed. And manage that. And if there are any changes ever get made to say control, then all three standards will automatically get updated when we rebuild the tag libraries. So what are the advantages of this new process? So the main thing is that it ensures that the standards are always going to be in alignment. Instead of having to constantly check, make sure everything is updated, making sure that every reference to control in EAC gets updated if there are changes that need to be made for EAD. Just by updating the shared pages, it updates all of the tag libraries at once. So this way, it's almost impossible for any of the standards to fall out of sync with each other because they're all pulling from the same definitions. And again, updating something once means it updates everywhere. There's no more sort of chasing down small discrepancies, making sure that everything gets updated. If you make your updates in the tag library files, then all the standards automatically get updated. And this also makes the tag libraries much simpler to manage. Working with a single large files is very unwieldy. So breaking it out into modular files makes it much easier to say track changes since you're working with smaller pieces. You no longer have to track changes across a 20,000 line XML document. And this is and what we did is we set up a directory structure to reflect how the various elements and attributes are shared. You can see on the right, this is an example from, I believe, the EAC3 tag library. You can see references to a shared folder. And here is where everything that's shared between any of the standards gets placed. And by having a special folder for them, what this essentially says is, if you're working in, say, EAD and you're making changes to shared, well, you should make sure that, remember, this is going to update all of the tag libraries. This isn't, just your local standard. This is something that we have to make sure the entire EAS is aware of. And then you can see for standard-specific pages, such as alternative set in EAC, those are in the EAC3 directory. It's the same for EAF and EAD4. And you can see that there is the EN subdirectory to those. So for translations, trying to do those via the single large document was very, very unwieldy. So what we did is we added in a language subcode so that if we ever say have a French translation of a tag library, we can just create the, say, shared FR directory and put the files in there. And then the build process is such that just by adding in a two-letter code, it'll rebuild the tag libraries using that language. So the new shared model for the tag libraries has been really fantastic. And you know, for things like shared definitions, shared usage, it's been really great. But we do recognize that there are times when we can't get perfect alignment between all the standards. There always can be structure, you know, small structural differences where, say, the may contain of an element may be different depending on the standard. You know, the top level element of a standard is always going to be different. So what we did is we implemented this a new type attribute into TEI. And what this does is it flags text in the TI to say only display this or only render this if you are building this tag library. So you can see in the first example, type equals EAD. That only renders for EAD documents. For EAC, only for the EAC documents, and EAF only for EAF. So this is sort of recognition that sharing that the core sharing of elements and attributes is there. They're shared definitions, shared concepts, but for a small sort of but to make sure the tag libraries are going to be accurate and useful for all the standards, we occasionally do have to sort of have these little kind of like sharp corners to making sure that we reflect that in the tag library. And that wraps me up, so thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And the last discussion that we had for day 2 is we talked about recommendations regarding transparency and descriptive practices. And this was an emerging need we felt that needed to be able to describe when AI, DEI, harmful language needs to be documented. And we aim to now solve this using the elements we already have. So there was a topic paper that was created and discussed, and it had to do with how to use the control elements, conventional declaration and maintenance event to describe when and where this has been utilized to create or enhance the EAS document or related resource. We talked about how to use the EAD element access to conditions to inform about accessibility depending on, for example, the physical size of a record. And then we also talked about content warnings, that there were a lot of dependencies, one being the evolution of your content standard and how it recommends handling these types of warnings. But the bottom line is that the membership agreed that the topic paper and recommendation will be part of the best practices guide. We didn't provide that in this meeting, but those will be forthcoming in the best practices guide. So keep an eye out for those. So day 3 was really all about breakout rooms. And what that centered around was there just were some topics that were more easily discussed in smaller groups. So a majority of the day was spent with some of these breakout rooms. And really the breakout rooms, part of it focus on, which you'll learn a little bit later, is that we, the TS-EAS has to do a submission package for approval of these standards. So we worked on topics that are working towards helping us towards that submission package, but also on broader topics that we thought maybe the community needed a little bit of a deeper dive, such as relations, which was an experimental element in EAD3, but has become a full-fledged element in EAD4. So breakout 1 had to do with relations. And the overall goal was to have as many examples of this practical application for all 3 of the standards and how relations works among the 3 standards. And the result was using the relation elements just gives us an opportunity to be more specific in describing a relation than just a plain textual note. And the outcome of this group will be that the use cases that they develop during the breakout will be reused as examples in the best practices guide. The second breakout room had to do with the alignment of standards. And what does that mean? What does that mean for the community? So we wanted to have kind of this one pager developed that would be an easy entry into the alignment of standards that we could share with the community. And so the group worked on creating this. And for those of you who have been with us for a while with EAD4, we produced an infographic. So it was kind of, the goal was to produce something very similar. And the phrase that came out of that was misalignment by design, moving towards alignment by design. So as we mentioned, you know, the EAD standards were kind of misaligned, and through all of this work, now they're going to be aligned. So how do we communicate that to the broader community? We had standards with similar attributes and elements in their own silos, and now we're sharing or reusing our elements and attributes. So this text has been created, and it will be in the next best practices guide, and again, transformed into an infographic that we'll share with the broader community. And the last breakout had to do with the tag library. Very similar to kind of the breakout number 2. So that was, again, creating kind of what are shared elements, maybe giving some background. I mean, Alex talked quite a bit about it, but how do you take what Alex said? And we now want to have a one-pager, not just to share with the broader community, but also as the introduction of the shared elements in the best practices guide. And then we will also be using that for our submission package to the Standards Committee and then SAA Council. And the result of that work is that the benefits of sharing is so obvious, but we have not yet really taken advantage of that sharing. As Alex mentioned, the technical and structural differences between standards may prevent perfect alignment, but these are not conceptual mismatches. Core elements remain consistent and reusable. And again, we'll be creating that text as an introduction and explanation in the best practices guide. Which brings us to this morning. Yes, we did meet this morning. So really this morning, the big topic was the submission package. And the next step is to finalize that submission package, which is a lot of elements. I'll show you a little bit in the next couple of slides. But we do have to send that first to the Standards Committee, who is our parent committee. And then with feedback and probably some additional editing, then it will be sent to the SAA Council for final approval. And this includes, you know, the textual document describing the submission, the work leading up, all the things that we've done. And then the authoritative submission really is the tag library, which is what Alex was talking about. So I'm not going to go over this in detail, but essentially the Standards Committee, which we are grateful for, they created kind of a checklist for us. So we need to, as we move through that process, we need to make sure that we hit all of these different points, and that when we do finally submit the packet, that all of these are checked off, so they have everything that they need to, you know, absorb it and then provide any feedback before forwarding it on to SAA. And the timeline, we have until basically October 31st, which is not a lot of time. But again, a lot of the work with the this past meeting with all the breakout rooms, it really was a huge push for us, and a leap in getting that submission package together. The Standards Committee will have a couple months to, you know, review it and to go back and forth with any edits, with the goal of submitting it to the Standards Committee by January 2026. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, it will be approved by the SAA Council early next year. And then in addition to the submission package, SAA 2026, we are going to try to pull together a proposal for a session at SAA 2026, because SAA 2026 is really the final reveal. If it does get approved, hopefully, that will be the release of all of these, the suite of standards. But leading up to that point, there's going to be a lot of work for outreach and communication, and it could be in the form of webinars, posts, or articles in professional journals. So really, there will be a big push for outreach and communication leading up to the final release of those standards. So that's it. So we're going to open up the floor in the last 10 minutes or so for any questions that anybody may have. I'm going to stop sharing for now, Karin, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfectly okay. So what questions do you have to ask? Something about our meeting or about the different standards? Kind of, you're free to ask anything about the EAS standards. So please raise your hand or write in the chat and we will respond to you. It looks like it has been a super clear presentation from us. I can say it has been 4 very intense days and we are starting to feel Zoom fatigue now. If no one has any questions, I was wondering, I can ask questions, but I'm going to say, Kirsten, there were a call for comments for EAD in the spring. What happened?
Yes, indeed, there was, and I've got just a couple of slides, but I don't know, I don't think I can share. So maybe, Mary, if you can pull up the slide deck again, there were a few slides at the very end that I added for the EAD. If you go to
If you go to slide 92.
yeah. Thank you very much. So just kind of as a means of an update, you might remember that we had a bigger call for comments last year. And we essentially kind of had a second round of comments and feedback requests to the community earlier on in spring this year, where we then kind of presented also our pickup on the feedback that we received in 2024. So we only had a month running time for this year's call for comments, and we received 16 new comments in total. And they were more or less evenly spread at the beginning between the schema and the tech library, which were kind of the main deliverables that we had published. Most of them essentially kind of concentrated on the new element form available that we are introducing with EAD4, and that is kind of bundling elements previously known as DAO, DAO set, but also alt form avail and originals lock into one concept that essentially kind of is very close to what Records and Contexts calls instantiation. So any physical or digital form that the materials might have. So it might be digitized material in JPEG or other image files. It might be microfiches, it might be copies that a different organization is holding of the materials that your organization has, and all variations that you can think of. If you go to the next slide, please, I just included a quick kind of overview of how we went through these comments. So we classified them as either being a feature request or a bug. There were 2 points in the tech library where we had typos or where links between elements were missing. So they were pretty straightforward. You can also find that on our GitHub repository. So the link is included in the slide. And if you go to the next and last slide, please. Essentially, the EAD team spent May, June, and July going through the feedback that we had received. The resulting changes essentially only led to 2 actual changes in the schema. So we have newly introduced an attribute called normalized form in the element referring string, and that is used to include a normalized way to state the name of the entity that is mentioned somewhere in a longer narrative text. And the second change that we have introduced is that we have essentially kind of gone back on a decision that we made last year and have reintroduced the element physical description, or physdesk as it was formerly known, so that it is possible to bundle extend dimensions and physical facet statements. All the other issues, while we were talking through them, essentially turned out to be more on the side of additional explanations in the tech library, examples, and things that might very well end up in the best practices guide that Iris presented earlier. And that essentially kind of, with the 4 days that we have now had in this week, concluded the review of EAD. So we are now kind of, as Mary said just a few minutes ago, in the phase of putting everything together so that we can submit it to SAA Standards Committee and later on Council.
Thank you, Kirsten. And I can just add that that referred string that Kirsten was talking about is actually a shared element. So really, here you see how all the standards are working together. Many thanks, Kirsten, for giving that brief update on what's happened since we last talked about the EAD revision. Has someone come up with a question? I can't see anything in the chat.
I think everybody has been stunned into silence. It's a lot of
Yeah,
information.
It's a lot of information, and it's really a condensation of 4 days. So what I will be doing without using the slide is saying thank you very much for your attention. This recording will in the final end be published on the SAA YouTube channel, and you will get an email regarding that and see when it's available. And together with that, the slide deck will also be available. And as Mary said, and I think I've said it, and as Kirsten said, when we are coming into having this the submission made and everything, you will be hearing a lot from us. So many thanks, everybody. And I'm not going to care about the time zones. It's 2 minutes to something. We will be stopping the recording and hope you have a nice evening, a nice day, a nice morning, a nice night. See you soon.